Perth has a way of changing with the seasons. By the middle of December, the heat settles over the city long after the sun goes down. The evenings seem to stretch on forever, and there's a feeling that Christmas is finally close enough to touch. On Friday nights, Albany Highway comes alive. Restaurants fill with families finishing another working week. Music spills from hotel bars. Cars crawl from one set of traffic lights to the next as people make their way home or head out to meet friends. It isn't difficult to imagine that scene in December of 1977. Different buildings, different cars, different faces, but the same warm night air. The same laughter drifting onto the footpaths, the same expectations that before the night was over, everyone would find their way home. 21-year-old Lorraine Kessey expected exactly the same. She spent the evening with friends, said her goodbyes, and started the short journey back to Maddington. She was never seen again. Today, nearly 50 years have passed, and Lorraine's disappearance remains one of Western Australia's oldest unsolved missing persons cases. What happened between saying goodbye and getting home has never been answered. This is Vanished West, a podcast exploring the stories of people who disappeared across Western Australia. Each episode examines the lives they left behind, the investigations that followed, and the questions that remain unanswered. If you believe stories like these deserve to be heard and that the missing should never be forgotten, follow Vanished West wherever you're listening. Vanished West is independently researched and produced by me. If you'd like to help keep the podcast going, you can support the show through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the episode description. Lorraine Kessey was 21 years old. Like many people her age, she was finding her own feet in life. She was living in Maddington with a friend, enjoying the independence that comes with having a place of your own, while still remaining close to the people who are important to you. She also loved animals. It's a small detail, but one that appears again and again whenever Lorraine's family speak about her. She shared her home with dogs and cats, and years later her niece would say the family never believed Lorraine had simply walked away from her life. It wasn't just because she loved her family, it was because she had every reason to come home. That probably sounds like an ordinary thing to say, and maybe it is, but ordinary details are often the ones that survive the longest. When someone disappears, families don't only remember birthdays and milestones. They remember routines. The cup that was always left on the bench, the chairs someone always sat in, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway at the end of the day. Those are the memories that linger. In December of 1977, there was no reason for Lorraine's family to think their routines were about to change forever. Christmas was only days away, and across Perth, people were finishing work for the year, making plans with friends, and preparing to spend time with family. It was a time of year built around returning home. Roads became busier, shopping centres filled to the brim with last-minute shoppers, and every evening seemed to carry a little more excitement than the one before. For Lorraine, Friday the 16th of December promised nothing more than a night out with friends. It wasn't meant to be memorable. There was no farewell, no sense that this evening would be any different from any other. Just a simple expectation that by the time the sun came up, she'd be back in Maddington, ready to feed the animals waiting for her. No one who saw Lorraine that evening could have imagined that nearly half a century later, investigators would still be trying to answer the same question. How did someone so close to home simply disappear? Friday the 16th of December 1977 was warm, the kind of evening that encourages people to stay out a little longer, have one more drink, and enjoy the company of friends before heading home. Lorraine's night began at the Coronation Hotel in Queen's Park, where she met friends before the group later made their way back to the Black Forest Tavern on Albany Highway in Vic Park. The Black Forest Tavern was still a relatively new addition to the area. Having opened only a few years earlier, it had quickly become one of the local places to catch up over a drink on a Friday night. With Christmas just over a week away, it was busy, filled with people looking forward to the holidays. As far as anyone has ever reported, Lorraine's evening was entirely unremarkable. There were no arguments, no sign that she was worried about anything, nothing to suggest that night would be remembered for any reason other than the company she was keeping. Later, Lorraine and one of her female friends accepted a lift to a house on Thomas Street in Cannington, where they continued socialising into the early hours of Saturday morning. Eventually, the evening came to an end. Friends suggested she stay the night. It would have been the easier option. Instead, Lorraine decided to head home. Years later, that decision would take on enormous significance because her family remembered exactly why she left. She wanted to get home to feed her cats and dogs. It's such a simple reason, one that probably wasn't given a second thought by anyone in the room, but it tells us something about Lorraine. She wasn't looking for another party, she wasn't planning to disappear that weekend. She thought she would be home before morning. Today, most of us would order a rideshare without thinking twice. In 1977, people found other ways home. Friends drove one another, taxis if they were available, or quite commonly, a lift from someone travelling in the same direction. Thinking about life in 2026 now, hitchhiking can seem almost unthinkable, but at the time it wasn't. For many Australians, it was simply another part of everyday life. Lorraine left Thomas Street alone. The last confirmed sighting of her was near the Carousel shopping centre in Cannington. From there, the trail disappears. No one can say with certainty whether she accepted another lift, whether she met someone she knew, or whether something happened within minutes of leaving. Only that Lorraine never reached Maddington. She was almost home. She just never made it there. When Lorraine didn't arrive home, those closest to her knew something was wrong. There was no mobile phone to call back then, no text message to send asking where she was, no location to be shared. If someone was late in 1977, you waited. At first, you assumed there was a simple explanation. Maybe she'd stayed with a friend, maybe she'd found another lift home, maybe she'd be home by breakfast. But breakfast came and went. Then the day, then another night. Very quickly, Lorraine's disappearance became a police investigation. And from the beginning, detectives treated it seriously. Newspaper reports published less than 2 weeks after Lorraine vanished revealed the scale of those early inquiries. Detectives had already interviewed more than 200 people, following every lead they could find. Around 60 reported sightings of Lorraine were investigated, each one carrying the possibility that the mystery was about to end. None of them did. Investigators also tried to locate Lorraine's former boyfriend who had moved to the eastern states around 2 months before she disappeared. Police explored whether Lorraine may have mentioned travelling to see him, although newspaper reports made it clear this would have been completely out of character. If Lorraine had planned to leave Perth, her family believed she would have told them. As police searched, so did Lorraine's family. Her father, David, refused to sit at home waiting for the telephone to ring. Instead, he drove, again and again, along Albany Highway, around the Carousel shopping centre, through the streets of Cannington and Maddington, looking for anything that might explain where his daughter had gone. One newspaper quoted him saying, "We try to keep an open mind, but it does get harder as the days go on." It's a sentence that captures something almost every family of a missing person has described. Those first few days are filled with possibilities. Then slowly these possibilities begin to disappear. As Christmas approached, Perth carried on as it always had. Families gathered, children opened presents, people celebrated another year coming to an end. For the Kessey family, however, Christmas of 1977 became something else entirely. It became the first Christmas with an empty chair. The first Christmas spent hoping that tomorrow might finally bring Lorraine home. It wouldn't be the last. As the weeks turned into months, Lorraine's disappearance became harder to explain. Not because detectives had stopped looking, because there was less and less to look at. Every reported sighting had to be investigated. Every telephone call had to be taken seriously. Every conversation had the potential to be the one that finally explained where Lorraine had gone after leaving Thomas Street that summer night. Yet each lead ended the same way, without answers. Today, it's easy to look back and wonder why the investigation couldn't simply follow Lorraine's movements. But in 1977, there was very little to follow. Detectives couldn't request mobile phone records because mobile phones didn't exist. There were no CCTV cameras capturing people walking through shopping centres or standing beside busy roads. No electronic banking records showing a final purchase. No digital trail of any kind. The investigation depended almost entirely on people, on what they remembered, on what they noticed, on whether they chose to come forward. And memories have a way of fading over time. A number plate that seemed unimportant one night is forgotten by the following week. The face of someone seen through a car window becomes harder to picture with every passing day. A small detail that might have solved a case slowly disappears with time. Unlike many of the disappearances that we've explored on Vanished West, I could find no evidence that Lorraine's case was ever examined in a publicly available coronial inquest. There were no findings that pieced together her final known movements, no courtroom testimony offering another perspective, no official explanation of what investigators believe happened after she was last seen. Instead, Lorraine's story simply stops. Her file remains open, the questions remained, but the trail itself had gone cold. For Lorraine's family, life carried on because it had to. Birthdays came and went, Christmas returned each year, the seasons changed. But every passing year carried the same unanswered question. Where was Lorraine? And would they ever know what happened to the young woman who should have been home before morning? For many years, Lorraine Kessey's disappearance slipped quietly from the public eye. Police never closed the investigation, but as the decades passed, there were no major breakthroughs, no arrests, and no public explanation for what had happened. For Lorraine's family, however, the case never became history. It remained part of everyday life. Speaking publicly many years later, Lorraine's niece, Melinda, shared a story that says more than any police file ever could. She recalled how her grandfather, David, refused to sell the family home for years after Lorraine disappeared. He believed that if Lorraine ever came back, she would come looking for home. It's difficult to imagine carrying hope for that long, yet families of missing people often describe living with a unique kind of grief. There is no certainty, no final conversation, no opportunity to say goodbye. Every unexpected knock at the door, every unidentified phone call, every rumour carries the possibility, however small, that this might finally be the moment everything changes. Lorraine's brothers, John and Les, have spoken about the loss their family continues to carry, describing how thoughts of Lorraine have never really left them. Nearly 5 decades on, they are still searching for answers. Melinda also reflected on Lorraine's love of animals, saying the family never believed she had simply chosen to disappear. The young woman who left friends because she wanted to get home and care for her dogs and cats wasn't someone they believed would willingly leave her life behind. In 2023, Lorraine's case returned to the headlines when the Western Australian government announced a reward of up to $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to the conviction of those responsible in 64 unsolved murders and suspicious disappearances. It was the first time in many years that Lorraine's name had received widespread public attention. Then, 2 years later, another development reminded Australians that even the oldest cases are never truly forgotten. Previously unreleased police documents revealed that investigators had, at one stage, reviewed Lorraine's disappearance alongside dozens of other unsolved cases while considering whether convicted serial killer Ivan Milat could have been responsible for crimes beyond those for which he was convicted. For listeners outside of Australia, Ivan Milat was convicted in 1996 of murdering 7 young backpackers in New South Wales. His crime shocked the country, and over the years detectives have periodically examined whether other historic disappearances could be linked to him. It is important, of course, to separate fact from speculation. There is no publicly available evidence connecting Ivan Milat to Lorraine Kessey's disappearance. No witness has placed him with Lorraine, no forensic evidence has linked him to her case, and no police agency has publicly identified him as a suspect in her disappearance. What the review does show is something else entirely. It shows that investigators have never stopped asking those questions. As investigative techniques improve and old records are revisited, detectives continue looking at Lorraine's disappearance through fresh eyes, hoping that one piece of information, perhaps something overlooked for decades, might finally explain what happened to the young woman who never made it home. Today, almost 50 years after Lorraine's disappearance, that hope remains. So does the reward, and so does the question that has echoed through one family since Christmas of 1977. What happened to Lorraine Kessey? Over the past week, I've read everything I could find about Lorraine Kessey's disappearance. Newspaper reports from those first desperate days, police appeals issued decades later, interviews with the family who've spent almost half a century living without answers. What surprised me most wasn't how much information there was, it was how little. For someone whose disappearance sparked such an extensive police investigation, Lorraine's public story is scattered across only a handful of sources. There are gaps that may never be filled, questions that were never publicly answered, and as far as I could establish, no publicly available coronial inquest to help explain what happened. In many ways, Lorraine's story has been preserved not by official documents, but by the people who have refused to let her be forgotten. I keep coming back to one small detail. Lorraine didn't leave because she was chasing a new life. She didn't leave after an argument, and she didn't tell anyone she was going away. She left because she wanted to go home. It might be the simplest decision anyone has ever made, and somehow it is also one of the saddest. Most of us have ended an evening exactly the same way. We say goodbye, promise to catch up again soon, and begin the familiar journey home without giving it another thought. For Lorraine, that journey never ended. I also haven't stopped thinking about her father. For years, he refused to sell the family home because he believed his daughter might one day walk back through the front door. Hope doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like leaving a house exactly as it is, just in case someone comes home. That's the part of this case that stayed with me the most. Not the theories or speculation, not even the mystery. Just a family that never stopped believing that there might still be one more knock at the door. If you know anything about Lorraine Kessey's disappearance, no matter how insignificant it may seem now all these years on, please contact Crime Stoppers or Western Australia Police. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened after Lorraine left for home that December night. And after all these years, her family still deserve that answer. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never forget those who vanished from the West.